Welcome
Also
to the,
transferring host responsibilities to you now.
thank you.
Okay, I'm going to read the preface of the Second Rainbow Coalition. The preface and the statement of unity is what holds our coalition together. Whatever the different individual groups do is their own, decision and everything, but this unity statement is what we all agree on. Okay, the preface. The U.S. was founded as a colonial settler state based upon white supremacy and slavery, stealing the lands of the indigenous nations, breaking every treaty made with them, and confining them to reservations, which are concentration camps. As the country became more powerful, the eagle sunk its claws into other nations, making war on Mexico and grabbing its northern territory, invading Cuba, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and the Philippines, and either annexing them outright or making them colonies or neo-colonies. And in the 20th century, it became the major imperialist power in the world, exploiting both the people within its boundaries and those in every other country, bullying them with military intervention and robbing them of their right to self-determination. As Huey P. Newton stated, we have two enemies to fight, racism and capitalism. Between the two, capitalism is primary. Racism is a byproduct of capitalism. The working people of the world of every ethnicity or nationality face a common enemy that is destroying life on earth. Our enemy is a small ruling class of property owners controlling most of the world's wealth and resources. We must have our basic needs met to live a good and meaningful life: food, shelter, health care, education, freedom from oppression by the state, and peace with other nations. To obtain these essential things for life, we must have the power to see to it that the abundance that is available is shared equitably. Statement of unity for the Second Rainbow Coalition. The legacy of the first Rainbow Coalition dates back to its founding on April 4th, 1969 by the original Black Panther Party, original Young Lords, and Young Patriots organization. A number of other organizations joined this coalition not too long afterwards, such as the American Indian Movement, the Brown Berets, Rising Up Angry, the Red Guards, and others. Since the founding of the United States, the masses had developed a number of popular movements that came together to fight against this capitalist imperialist system in various ways around particular demands. Nevertheless, none had established a movement quite like the first Rainbow Coalition. This historic movement was the first of its kind that established a model of class struggle like no other. Its charismatic leader, Chairman Fred Hampton of the Illinois chapter of the original Black Panther Party, stated that at the end of the day, we weren't engaged in a race struggle. He said that it's a class struggle, God damn it. By uniting with the various oppressed ethnicities and masses, they were able to bridge the gap between the various ethnic communities that white supremacy had long sought to keep divided. This class solidarity equipped them with a material basis and class consciousness to see their common class condition. Therefore, the necessity to form a united front against their common class oppressor, the capitalist imperialist ruling class. The ruling class viewed this as the greatest threat to their class rule, and subsequently used the entire repressive forces of the state, police, courts, jails, prisons, and intelligence agencies, etc., in order to crush this emerging revolutionary socialist movement. We refounded the Rainbow Coalition on May 14, 2021, with the intent of upholding the legacy of the original Rainbow Coalition. We believe that this historic example is the model for the united front that will best serve our class liberation. Upholding the 10-point program of the original Black Panther Party, which was subsequently adopted and later expanded by the original Young Lords, Young Patriot Organization, and all other original Rainbow Coalition members, we establish our programmatic unity. The 6 disciplinary rules that we uphold tie all organizations in our coalition to a common professional discipline. History has bestowed upon our generation a common mission to fulfill. The representatives of the capitalist imperialist ruling class, represented by the Democratic Party and Republican Party, cannot liberate us. It is their class intention and interest to uphold our common class oppression. Therefore, it is only we, the oppressed masses of all ethnicities and nationalities, who must build the necessary class solidarity, class consciousness, organizational structures, and a united front that will ultimately liberate ourselves. This is what this Second Rainbow Coalition is committed to. This is the historic mission we intend to fulfill. Dare to struggle, dare to win. All power to the people and boots on the ground. Now there's a list. All members of the coalition. New African Black Panther Party, White Panther Party, Green Party of New Jersey, Poor People's Army, La Mesa Nacional de Brown Berets, FURY, which stands for Feminist Uprising to Resist Inequality and Exploitation, NASO, North Alabama School for Organizers, and the New Era Young Lords, and the Guardian Rebellion. Now, did I miss anything? That's my most updated form. I
The
think,
6 rules should be way down at the bottom, it's kind of small.
okay, yeah. Does anybody want to read those, or do they have the 6 disciplinary rules?
I can read them, Sis.
Okay.
Okay, the 6 disciplinary rules. The first one is members will conduct themselves in a manner to bring credit to the coalition and will treat others with respect and politeness. 2, members will be sober when on Rainbow Coalition business and will not engage in any criminal activity while a member. 3, no member will engage in violence except in the extremity of self-defense. 4, members will not gossip nor be divisive to the unity of the Second Rainbow Coalition. 5, members will not act as informers nor work against the purpose of the Second Rainbow Coalition. 6, nobody is authorized to speak for the Second Rainbow Coalition unless authorized to do so.
Yeah, thanks for reading all that. So today we're reading chapter 19 of My Search for Answers, Truth and Meaning by Kwame Ture. Chapter 19 is Back to SHU, Back to My Studies. So I'll go ahead and read and then pass it to somebody if that works. Day, buddy yelled to me, turn it to CNN. When I turned on my TV onto CNN, April 24th, 2007, flashing across the bottom of the screen, it read that a full-scale riot was in progress at the Newcastle Correctional Facility. The first thought that came to my mind as I was watching this unfold was that I knew something like this was going to take place. There was too much tension there between prisoners themselves, along with the tension I felt between many of the prisoners and the guards. I wasn't sure which would be the spark that set it off, but I knew I had to leave that facility if I didn't want to find myself facing my 3rd outside case. Part of me was relieved because my mom, my family were angry with me for being back on the SHU for the third time. They felt that I should have just sucked it up and dealt with it. This was the first time I had been in prison close to Indianapolis, where it wasn't a hassle for them to come see me. I questioned myself a lot about that, the 3 weeks prior to the riot breaking out at Newcastle. 3 weeks later, that riot vindicated me with my family. They were all glad that I had done what I had done to get moved. They all figured if I had been there when that had taken place, I would have been involved and probably rounded up as one of the ringleaders. And they're probably right about that. Knowing me, I probably would have felt compelled to organize it in a way where we could put forth demands which could change conditions there. I don't remember one demonstration that had jumped off over the years while I was in prison that I wasn't directly involved in or trying to organize a demonstration to achieve long-term results. For me, that was just part of the struggle behind the wall and razor wire fences. That was all part of being boots on the ground. One of the main reasons behind that riot was the fact that Newcastle was a privately owned prison run by a Florida-based company called GEO Group Incorporated. In September 2005, they had signed a contract with the state of Indiana to run the prison. Not too long after I was placed on administrative segregation there, they had started transferring a lot of prisoners from Arizona to the facility. I'm sure GEO saw this as a lucrative opportunity that they couldn't pass up. When I had arrived, there were only a few dormitories that were in use. I don't think the prison was even a third of capacity then. This is at a prison that is the second largest prison in Indiana, capable of holding 3,270 prisoners today. GEO needed to fulfill those beds by any means necessary. If that meant transferring prisoners all the way from Arizona there in order for their dollar to make sense, they were going to do it. The human factor obviously wasn't a major factor in the decision-making. While CNN and all the media outlets were trying to make it seem like a riot occurred because there was tension between the Indiana prisoners and the Arizona ones, we heard through the prison grapevine that the Arizona prisoners were being moved there involuntarily, and they didn't want to be moved so far from their families and friends. That was understandable because I'm sure most of them would have never gotten visits if they would have been forced to serve out their time in Indiana. We also heard that they were being deprived of a lot of the stuff that they were accustomed to having in Arizona prisons, like cigarettes. Indiana had done away with tobacco in their prisons in 1997. I know that because it happened while I was in boys' school. I remember a lot of us thinking that the prisoners at IYC were going to riot over that. We could literally see the prison yard of IYC from our rec yard when I was in boys' school. After they prohibited the use of cigarettes from all the adult facilities in Indiana, I remember we could go to outside rec and speculate amongst ourselves if today was going to be the day the adult prisoners rioted over the removal of tobacco from their commissary. To our surprise, it never occurred. I can imagine for the Arizona prisoners, that was an untenable situation on many levels. To find yourself clear across the country in another state without being able to visit with your family and friends is one thing. To go from tobacco being, quote, legal to being, quote, illegal overnight was metaphorically symbolic of the fact that their day had transferred into night all in less than 24 hours. I understood why they had kicked off that riot. I was just surprised to see how many of the Indiana prisoners had joined, since many of them were, quote, short timers. I figured that they were more likely to kick off a, quote, race riot when I was there because of the tension between the brothers and the Aryans that I felt when I first arrived. On the other hand, I had seen how the guards spoke down to prisoners there in such a condescending manner that I figured that if there were going to be assaults on guards, it would come from the guys who had recently been sent there from a maximum security prisons in Michigan City, Pendleton, and Wabash. A lot of us had such a hard time adjusting to that prison that the facility was a ticking time bomb on several different levels. I think that what the public schools needs to know about privately run prisons is that they're profit driven, just like any other business model. The only difference is that their quote commodity and quote market is acquiring human bodies to fill beds. How they do that negates what is often in the best interest of the prisoners themselves. I personally believe all privately owned facilities should be banned in the United States and across the globe. The incentive to lock up people for profit, I believe, feeds the phenomenon of mass incarceration. What if fire departments across the United States were privately owned? I'm sure we would be hearing bizarre stories of these fire departments being responsible for some of the very fires they were called upon to put out in order to keep profits high, especially in the parts of the United States where fires are less likely to occur. I don't believe this is far-fetched. We see stories all the time nowadays where private-run hospitals especially will make a patient endure all these unnecessary tests in order to bring in more money. We see where healthcare insurance companies are always finding ways to exploit patients with exorbitant costs where they only exist due to the profit incentive. Even under capitalism, some things make much more sense being controlled by the state than it does being run by a business that places profit over all other concerns. Once something becomes privately run, what it initially was designed for becomes lost in the rat race to make more money in complete disregard for all other concerns. The industries that have sprung up around prisons have made many corporations rich off the backs of the poor and oppressed communities. Every year, phone companies are exploiting prisoners and their families with the racket prices that they were all making off of prison phone calls, while we can make international calls to people across the world for free nowadays. What sense does that make? Well, it makes a lot of sense when those cents make billions of dollars off mass incarceration every year off the backs of oppressed. Modern day slavery is probably more profitable today than it ever was during chattel slavery. My first several weeks back on the SHU, I tried my best to fight my placement there. My mother had called downtown to speak to various officials in the Indiana Department of Corrections to see why I had been moved there. I didn't realize it at the time, but I had been transferred to the SHU partly for the same reason why the Arizona prisoners had been transferred to Newcastle, to fill beds because of money. That whole year was going into 2008. They were sending people all across the state to the SHU. There was a whole wing of the SHU, A West, that had recently finished being renovated, and they needed to fill those cells up. The state paid more money to confine guys on the SHU each year than to house them in regular general population cells. So Wabash made sure they kept those supermax cells filled. They were sending guys from Michigan City and trying to pacify them by telling them that they would be there temporarily and would be sent back to Michigan City after they finished the renovations at their quote parent facility. After a while, months began turning into years, and that's when it all started to realize that we had all been played. At first, I thought I was the only one who had been singled out like that until I witnessed guys being sent there routinely who had no other reason to be there other than to fill a bed. Most would arrive angry and disbelief and try to fight it for a month or two. You always knew another new arrival had been duped the first day they had arrived on the SHU. Quote, man, I think they were made a mistake or some shit, they would all tell us. I'm not surprised to be here. I need to talk to a counselor. After a month or two, they would come to the same realization they had. They tricked us, and now we were trapped in the real life black hole. Besides, in my case, Captain Uncle Tom had written a report on me and placed it in my confidential file that the case manager on the SHU had given me. I guess he got tired of me harassing him about being there and wanted me to see for myself the damaging report that Newcastle had placed on my file. They had fabricated a completely false report, making me out to be a crazy person who was a quote security threat to the facility and might stab another officer at any moment. I knew the real reason they had done so was because I wasn't willing to compromise and stay there. That's the way they normally dealt with quote Negroes that didn't know their quote their place. I had seen them a number of times even use a black officer to carry out their wishes, like they used Captain Uncle Tom. Individuals like him were Black, but they were the enforcers of white supremacy and the repressive arm of the state. Their roles were the same as all of the other Black faces who had climbed the ladder of white supremacy and been accepted as overseers of the capitalist imperialist system. No matter if they were police chiefs, mayors, city council officials, guards at the prison, or even the president of the United States, they were the neo-colonial agents that were given the task to keep the oppressed ethnic communities and lower class masses subordinate to their class rule. The ruling class, since the overthrow of colonialism, had learned a very important lesson. It is much easier to keep any population in check, deceiving them, and make them complacent within their own oppression when the people overseeing them look like them. That's the essence of neocolonialism and how they apply that across all levels of the state domestically. Frantz Fanon explained that very eloquently in his book, The Wretched of the Earth. I was so angry after I read that report because I knew I had handled that situation very responsibly and was doing my best not to be placed back on segregation. If I was a correctional staff and shared their worldview, I would have placed myself on the SHU too. That's how bad they made me out to be. After I read that, I pretty much resigned myself to possibly serving out the remainder of my sentence on the SHU, which was 11 years. That wasn't far-fetched either, since Buddy and LB were still on the same range that I had left 4 years prior. The only thing that had changed was that they were in different cells. Part of me felt bad that I had gotten off of segregation while they had been under the most extreme conditions that whole time. Neither one had any idea of how long they would still have to be on the SHU. In LB's case, he was confined there for all those years for something that they knew he didn't do, on top of the fact that he was in prison for a murder that the state of Indiana knew he hadn't committed. If there was ever a person that I was glad I didn't have to live their life, it was him. Life had completely been unfair to him. Does anyone want to pick up there for a minute?
I can pick up, brother.
Thank you.
The few months that we were all back on the SHU together on the same range, we kicked it over the range often. They filled me in on a lot of stuff that had transpired in their lives since the last time I had seen them. Buddy and I had written back and forth to each other over the last 4 years. So I was familiar with a lot of the things going on in his life. Every day it seemed like LB and I had grown even closer. I was in cell 112 and he was in cell 111. Since we were in adjacent cells, anytime we wanted to talk about stuff that we didn't want anyone else to hear, we could talk through our vents and hear each other clearly. A number of times I remember him and I talking in our vents for literally hours. He was an entertaining person to talk to because he was a very animated storyteller. If there were different characters in the story, he would change up his voice and be that person. It was like witnessing a play in audio. He was a natural actor. I got so used to his way of telling a story that I found myself mimicking his delivery at times until one of the guys would tell me, "Bro, you're doing that LB shit again, stop it." Besides reminiscing and dialoguing with LB and Buddy to pass my time, I started getting back into my studies hardcore again. For years, I had been receiving a newspaper from the Revolutionary Communist Party called Revolution. Occasionally, I would read it, but most of the time, I would only read an article or two. Around the time I came back to the SHU, they had printed several articles about a book they were pushing a campaign around. The book was called The Science of Evolution and the Myth of Creationism, Knowing What's Real and Why It Mattered by Ardea Skybreak. Ardea Skybreak was an evolutionary biologist who was also a member of the Revolutionary Communist Party. It originally started off as articles she had written and eventually became a book for the lay reader. I have been wrestling with the validity or invalidity of evolution for years, but never picked up a single book on the subject. When they mentioned that they were sending free copies to prisoners, I hurried up and wrote to them and requested a copy of the book. When it finally came in the mail, every day I read it and took a lot of notes in the margins of my copy. Most of my books had written notes scribbled throughout them. Anytime I would read a new book, I would summarize important passages at the top of that page and underline that passage. Then I would write that summary, or wait, I wrote and let me start all over here. Anytime I would read a new book, I would summarize important passages at the top of that page and underline that passage. Then I would write that summary I wrote and page number on a blank page at the front of the book. In that way, if I ever wanted to locate that passage again in the future, all I would have to do was consult my own index. It was an effective way to quickly find passages later that stood out to me. Besides, one of the few things I agreed with Marcus Garvey on is that a book hasn't been put to its full use if it isn't marked up with notes everywhere. I just took that a step further by creating my own indexes whenever I wanted to locate a particular passage again. Furthermore, anytime I read any book more than once, I noticed that it was a good way to keep a diary of my thoughts and interpretations of the things I would read. Often I would go back to a book and notice that my interpretation had changed drastically and I had a clearer understanding of what the author was really trying to convey. I thought that only happened when a person read the Bible more than once for the longest. I realize now that every book one reads more than once, the person normally walks away with a deeper interpretation of it, partly because you read other books and have life experiences that enriches your understanding and comprehension the second or third time around, but also because our level of consciousness increases the more we study. And what was formerly abstract and obscure becomes more and more concrete in how we associate what the author is really trying to convey to us. Before I read Ardea Skybreak's book, I had all kinds of misunderstandings about evolution. I used to think that evolutionists were saying that we had evolved from chimpanzees. Like most, I thought that was ridiculous. I would repeat some of the same straw man arguments as everyone else. If evolution was true, why aren't chimpanzees turning into humans still today? I would repeat misrepresentations like that, thinking I have proven something or making an irrefutable case against evolution. But unbeknownst to me, I was just proving that I didn't know what the hell I was talking about. The few times I had gotten into dialogues with people about why I felt evolution was a stupid belief for someone to have, none of those individuals really were well versed in the subject matter themselves to make counter arguments to challenge me. Therefore, for most of my life, I chalked up the belief in evolution as being the same as believing in any religion. It was simply an opinion that people accepted as true by way of faith. How wrong and misinformed I had been. I didn't even reach the end of Skybreak's book before I realized that evolution was a scientific fact. The evidence of its validity was so clear and convincing that I could no longer deny it. In fact, I realized that the theory of evolution was probably one of the most extensively researched and proven scientific theories that had been substantiated by scientists all over the world from various countries. Part of my initial misrepresentations on the subject came from me not understanding what the term theory even meant. Most lay people hear the term theory and we assume that it was equivalent to one making a guess or simply one's opinion. However, Ardea pointed out what scientists mean by the term scientific theory. She put in the glossary section of her book that a theory, while in everyday language, a theory often means a guess or something that has not been proven to be true. In science, a theory refers to a complex body of thought that ties together a number of different ideas and proposals, which successfully explain from a number of different angles the basic principles and mechanisms involved in a natural process, such as the origins and later change and development of some part of actual material reality. Scientific theories, which have been repeatedly tested and verified and that are now supported by extensive accumulated scientific evidence, such as the theory of gravitation, the Copernican, does anyone know how to say that?
Sounds right.
Copernican, maybe.
Oh, no, I think you had it right. Like, how did you say it? Copernican. I thought it sounded good.
Copernican. Okay, that sounded good.
That sounds good to me.
Okay, Coper, my Mexican accent jumps in out of nowhere. Okay, which I guess this theory would be the motion of planets, including the Earth around the sun, and the theory of evolution are considered by the scientific community to be well-established scientific facts. One of the examples that she laid out that was very easy to understand was artificial selection. All the dogs that exist in the world today evolved from a single common wolf-like ancestor. However, all the many different breeds of dogs today came about through the artificial selection of humans. By breeding dogs over successive generations for certain physical characteristics, behaviors, and anatomical features, humans were able to give rise to distinct breeds such as tiny Chihuahuas, German Shepherds, to Rottweilers, to Poodles, to Pit Bulls, to Great Danes. In order to keep these breeds distinct, people had to keep the separate breeds from breeding together, even though all dogs are considered one species. Canis familiars, I saw in artificial selection how natural selection worked and how different species of animals could come about over hundreds of millions of years. Natural selection just had millions of years to unconsciously shape the ecosystem through random mutations, sexual selection within species, predation by other animals, adaptation, and being separated by geological barriers that ultimately gave rise to a new species in periods of geological time. It's hard for people to think in tens and hundreds of millions of years, but that's one of the beauties of studying geology and paleontology. There's another one of those words that came from this book for me. Those disciplines of science reinforce the evidence of evolution by studying different geological time periods in the history of evolution on this planet. I think the 5 mass extinctions, Ordovician period, which was 450 million years ago, Devonian period, which was 350 million years ago, Permian period, which was 250 million years ago, Triassic period, which was 200 million years ago, and KT extinction, which was 65 million years ago, all highlighted the evidence of evolution clearly for me. One can see that after every mass extinction, new animals and plants emerge that can't be found in geological layers before. How does one explain that? That God repeated the creation of life multiple times, even though neither the Bible nor the Quran makes any mention of it? That seemed ridiculous to me, especially since most species that ever existed on this planet are now extinct. Yet we can find horses that used to exist, that used to gallop on several toes instead of the one that they do today. The evolutionary history of horses was right there in the geological record, just like whales and even humans. Yeah, humans hadn't evolved from chimpanzees directly, but the two of us did evolve separately from a common ape ancestor 4 to 10 million years ago. Humans today had directly evolved from other human species such as Homo erectus, Homo habilis, and others, which are all extinct today. Yet, we have found extensive evidence of this from all over the world in the fossil record. Those who claimed that there was no proof of evolution, like I had done so at one time, hadn't taken the time out to investigate it for themselves. The most poignant realization came halfway through the book for me, when I realized that if the dinosaurs had never gone extinct, that we and nearly all mammals that exist today would have never come about. That became my epiphany moment. Due to their extinction, mammals were given the necessary space to evolve from little rat-like species and come to populate the world where the dinosaurs once reigned supreme. I had always viewed human existence as being inevitable, as the ultimate creation of God for most of my life. Natural selection was showing me that no species was inevitable and there was never an ultimate plan to life on Earth. My anthropomorphic God, which we were always told we were created in the likeness of, had finally died in my consciousness. Every species' evolutionary history and emergence was a product of random and non-random variables. If the Earth wasn't an inhabitable location for life to exist in relation to the sun, no species would have ever evolved on Earth. If the primates that we evolved from would have gone extinct before our revolutionary branch emerged, we wouldn't be here today. If any of the Homo species of humans, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, etc., would have gone extinct before the emergence of the common ancestor that led to our eventual emergence, we wouldn't be here today. When I realized the implications of that very fact, I remembered chill bumps engulfing me and my eyes growing big. I ran to the mirror in my cell and whispered out loud to myself, "Wow, I'm an atheist now." There was no question in my mind that all life on Earth had evolved and could be accounted for by a clear natural explanation. I was 28 years old in the summer of 2007 when I made this transition in my life. Maybe somebody else can pick up here.
Get up, sister. The following years on the SHU, I read countless books about evolutions and atheism. My favorite evolutionary biologist was Richard Dawkins and Kenneth R. Miller. I read Dawkins' book, The Greatest Show on Earth, The Evidence for Evolution, and The God Delusion. Both books reinforced that evidence for evolution and solidified my atheist outlook on life. As much as I respected Kenneth R. Miller and read several of his books, such as Only a Theory, Evolution, and The Battle for American Souls and Finding Adoring God, a scientist's search for common ground between God and evolution, I was surprised to learn that Kenneth R. Miller still believed in God and was a Catholic. I have read several books by creationists and intelligent design advocates and found them all ridiculous and unconvincing. But because Miller didn't distort the fact that evolution was a scientific fact, I wanted to know how such a smart man could still believe in God. Therefore, I read his book, Finding Doran's God. If there was any scientist who could have convinced me that God existed, it was him. After I read his book, I realized that he was gasping for straws through and didn't really prove God existed via science at all. One of the biggest puzzles I wrestled with over the years was understanding the Big Bang. I was already convinced that there was no such thing as an intelligent designer of the universe, but I try to keep my mind open to all new information. However, the more I study physics, astronomy, and the universe, the more I found that science could accurately explain everything from strictly natural causes. Stephen Hawking's book, A Briefer History of Time, helped me to understand the universe tremendously. He also hosted a number of programs on television about the universe as well that I could watch. The only thing I didn't like about reading the books is that he would use the term God often, even though I was aware that he was an atheist too. Neil deGrasse Tyson was another astrophysic that would often have programs about the universe on TV that I would watch. The fact that he was Black and an atheist like myself made me feel that I wasn't alone. Victor J. Stinger book, God, the Failed It Hypothesis, How Science Shows that God does not exist, answer one of the most important questions for me. If the Big Bang was true, how did something come from nothing? If one takes all the positive matter and energy in the universe and what Jinx Pope, what is
Juxtaposes.
juxtaposes, I'm sorry. It is to all the negative matters and energy in the universe. The total sum would amount to zero. In mathematical terms, +1 plus -1 equals 0. But is that really nothing? In a sense, that's most view that term. It was the same with the universe. When one rewound the tape back to the Big Bang, 13.7 billion years ago, with all the positive and negative energy, matter was compressed into zero. In that state where the universe was compressed into a singularity, it was unstable. Therefore, we got the Big Bang. Ironically, when I read the Dalai Lama book called Practicing Wisdom, he argued that everything emerged from nothing as well. For me, the question was, which one was right? The scientists who base everything on scientific material evidence, or the metaphysicians like the Dalai Lama who conceive of that proof in their minds, or holy books that were all, conjectures from others' mind. The answer to that question was obvious to the now. Becoming an atheist, changed a lot of things in my life. The most significant one was that I no longer felt the burden of religion, dogma, and a belief in a make-believe God who made me feel like my very existence was sinful and tainted. I felt free from all of that for the first time in my life. It was as if a huge 1,000-pound gorilla had been lifted from my shoulders. I could now breathe and be fully human. Out of all the humans that ever walked the face of the earth, I realized I was one of the few that ever figured out those big questions of life. Is religion and God true? On the other hand, I felt very alone in this knowledge because I knew the most of humanity was still plunged into either the religion of metaphysic matrix. It was as if I were Neo and have taken the red pill from Morpheus in the movie The Matrix, and could now see the metric clearly. It was self-liberating on one hand, but on another, it was a new kind of burden when you realize how unknowing that most of my species was. When I disclosed the fact that I was an atheist to my mother, it really hurt her deeply. In her mind, she thought I was lost. I'm sure she felt it. If I didn't get back to my upbringing, I would go to hell one day. For years, she would try different ways of trying to get me to come back to Christ. After a while, she gave up when she realized that she was actually creating a bigger wedge between us. What she didn't recognize was that I felt the same way about her that she felt about me. Well, she believed I was lost. I knew that she was, and it could be proven. At times, I vacillated between anger and pity for my mother. I wasn't really angry that she was responsible for my forced indoctrination coming up because I knew she had only done what she thought was right. I was angry that she wouldn't investigate the evidence for herself. My sister and brother both walked away from Christianity for the same reason I did eventually, but she still wouldn't investigate why we at least didn't believe in Christianity or religion anymore. I felt she at least owed all three of us that, especially since she would try to make us all, quote, believe it, end of quote. Although none of us no longer did, both of them are still spiritual, which doesn't bother me. I was just glad that they discovered that all religions were man-made creation like myself. For years, I found myself trying to convince everybody. I came across in prison to see that religion was false and that evolution was a scientific fact. I was able to convince a handful of guys to investigate it to themselves and open their eyes. But for the most part, most only became defensive and clung to their religion beliefs and their belief in God all the more. After a while, I stopped being so forceful and started to be more tolerant. Instead of trying to persuade everyone I came across, I tried uniting with people across the things we could agree upon and not letting their religion beliefs and belief in, quote, God, end of quote, be a source of disunity. Even it, I have to turn to the next page, Joy. We achieve a socialist revolution in the United States. I recognize that most people will still be religion and believe in some, quote, God, end quote. I figured that I would never hide my world outlook from anyone and would help anyone who wanted to answer those big questions of life if they wanted it. But I would no longer go out of my way. I truly believe that humanity would eventually accept the truth. It just won't be in my lifetime. I hope sooner rather than later. I fear if it takes too long that we may become extinct like all the other human species before us due to our own self-destruction and widespread ignorancy. As Malcolm X once remarked it, You can hate the roots of a tree without ending up hating the tree. In the same vein, one can hate evolution without hating the evolutionary tree of life that gave rise to our own existence. I just wish Malcolm would understand his own words in relation to our own evolutionary roots as he understood why Blacks can hate Africa without hating ourselves. End of chapter 19. Wow, this was very deep, and
Yeah.
it also brings up our own conclusion and perspective as far as religion is concerned. I don't want to take it away because I'm not the moderator today, but it just leave us with that that question that Brother Kwame talked about concerning the question of life. And I know growing up, my parents have really basically left the choice of our preference concerning religion up to us. Because, especially my mother felt that should be an individual decision, providing the tools that we have in the teaching. But I had a grandmother who was very strict Baptist. And if we stay over her house, Sunday morning, we better get up and get ready to go to church. And I remember that one time I told my grandmother, I think I was around 5 or 7 or some young age, that I wasn't going to church. Because I don't have time to be thinking about God and what he has to do. Well, after my grandmother scolded me and spanked my bottom, she said, "You going to church?" And I told her, I am not going to church at all, and I'm not putting on a dress. Why? And I'm going to the church with my slip on, because she dragged me out.
Oh, no.
Dragged me out of the house with my slip on. And I say that'd be the last time that I would challenge her in reference to her religion. But my mother was very lenient, and pretty much so was my father. He didn't really get into basically any conversation, in regard to religion, in which I have not raised up any questions to ask him about that, except that I was challenged by the Baptist faith, according to my grandmother, that brought me back to that experience. Does anyone have anything that they want to share about their views, and what they think in concern of what Brother Kwame speaks about?
Yeah, it's interesting because I've read some of the, he was referencing Richard Dawkins, which is real famous evolutionary biologist who's also like a staunch atheist who like evangelizes atheism. And I actually, my journey to academia came about through, or I should say academia, intellectualism, I guess, came about through engaging Richard Dawkins and other atheists. And that's when I began like really thinking about the world around me, and started just inquiring more about just all sorts of different questions, and really like kind of took myself to YouTube University before I ended up going to school, which, I was a high school dropout. And, now I'm, I don't consider myself an atheist. I consider myself a, believer in God. I don't necessarily believe in like the Christian God, but I think it's all one God. one energy out there that's just a higher energy that we can access. And in my I guess journey for truth and justice, that was a starting point. And then, as I went to college and started investigating my whiteness and colonialism and racism and whatnot, which that is what got me into, social justice work. And it was just interesting to me to hear that, he obviously wrote this stuff in here because that was some influential stuff for him. And I see that a lot in myself. Though now I don't consider myself an atheist, and I see, I think we live in a very spiritually deprived society. I think a lot of people, like yourself, Sister Anna, that were dragged to church. I mean, that was me. I grew up in Utah and grew up Mormon, and was dragged to church so much, and it would really put me off to the idea of God, and put me off to a lot of teachings. Like my grandma was a very, very staunch Mormon lady. She was born in 1920 and, grew up in a completely different world from me. And now things are starting to become full circle for me as I've become spiritual and realize that a lot of the things that my grandma and my aunts and uncles were speaking about the Mormon lens, were very spiritual things. And I think that's actually a really a decolonial project, to engage in spirituality and get knowledge of self and to really, work on yourself and your own energy and connect with a higher energy to be able to, figure out how you fit into the world and how you can use that as a piece in social justice and revolutionary work. I mean, Jesus was absolutely a revolutionary, right? And not just Jesus. A lot of, I look at Martin Luther King. I don't, may not agree he's a revolutionary or not, but he centered his faith and spiritual practice and all of that in effort to change this world.
Well, that's very
Yeah,
interesting.
I
Appreciate
was gonna sort of remark on this in that I looked at this part about Kwame's experience as his struggle to look at the world scientifically. He was not just reading stuff about religion. I mean, all this other stuff led him to these views, like studying evolution, physics, understanding biology, that kind of thing led him to his own understanding. Now, I can identify with certain of it stuff. I mean, I was taken to church. I was raped. My father for a while was a minister, so we went through all that stuff, and I saw a lot of the dark side of the church, you might say. And I totally understand some of this hurtful stuff that can happen to people through religion. I like the part where he talks about how he realized for the first time that he was not a dirty thing, a sinful thing, right? Because a lot of the premise in the church is that you're born broken, you're born bad, sort of, and you have to be saved, and you have to be cleansed in the blood of the Lamb, right? That's sort of the faith. Now, here's what my own experience was. I think when I was my father got all disenchanted with the church for good reasons, actually. And when I was about 12 years old, I was talking about Christmas one time. We weren't going to church then. And I started talking about the Christmas story. And he said to me, well, it's just a story. And I was like, what? What? You're
Wow.
telling me this is the one thing that I conformed to and believed in you about. And because I've told you before how mean he was to me, that for me to have united about that, it was like, okay, well, that's it. That's, I said, it's a story. It's not true. None of it's true. And I walked away from it. But I wanted to say about the way Kwame sort of discovered things in the end of this chapter, where he talks about how he resolved to be with people. And, in a previous chapter, do y'all remember where he decided to join a Kwanzaa ceremony?
Right.
And he found that by doing that, he was able to communicate to people things he was learning.
Yes.
So actually, me and my husband, we did the same thing here in Chicago. I mean, we were sort of in, working very much as revolutionaries, but on a newspaper, and we were very sort of inward, not out there in the population. We weren't in the community. And we decided that we really needed to go out and get into the community. And so we went to church. I mean, the church is the community. There are tons of people in church, right? And, we tried to identify with the metaphors that we could, right? The one like Christ was a revolutionary, that Christianity stands for the poor, that fights for the poor, this kind of thing. And we took up that aspect of it. And so we were given an assignment to go and be on this committee for reforming immigration. And we got more involved all the time in our community that way. And so I don't regret a minute of it. But I will say that I think that understanding what's real in science, but also understanding how you got to relate to people, this is a very important thing. I mean, a revolutionary cannot put their nose up at people. We can't go around telling them they're wrong all the time, I mean, you have to find out what it is you can unite with so that you can teach, because you have something to teach. So
Right. Matter of fact, I think it was who was a Malcolm X. He didn't really put religion into a reference in revolutionary because of the fact we all have our different beliefs, and it comes based on what we was taught, what we discover, and where we are now. In which one thing that Brother Nick had mentioned is energy, which you can feel based on people energy. And also their own individual belief is something, area that I would not get into a deep discussion with them, because some people hold on or see their religion as an ultimate means as far as their life is concerned. And you never want to cross that line where a person see a certain religion is what they have, or else they have no reason to live. And I, for one, believe in life, that's the important thing. And personally, I don't believe, personally, I don't believe in reincarnation, but I believe in being sent to a higher plane. Don't bring me back to earth. I don't want to be reinvented to anything that I may end up not being, or don't want to be. Just beam me up to another level.
beam me up, Scotty.
Higher frequency. That's all I want. That's all I want.
I think like kind of
Oh, go
going
ahead,
off
go
of
ahead.
what, sorry.
No,
Go
go
I think
ahead.
kind of
Lisa.
going off of what Nick was saying. I think what I like about the fact of like Kwame's journey is the fact that, I mean, he did the research himself. He did the work himself
Yeah.
too. How I view it is, I guess, unindoctrinating himself. Like when he grew up, he just grew up. Like that's what his parents told him. You know what I'm saying? Like it wasn't that he necessarily did the work. He read the Bible, sure, but it was being influenced. You know what I mean? And I think that we all in some way, shape, or form had that, like whether it was Sister Anna literally getting dragged out of the house to go to church, or whether it was, you know what I mean, like whether it was right, whether it was me being on my, like, I don't know, identity crisis journey, trying to figure out where the fuck I belong. You know what I mean? Pardon my language.
Yes, ma'am.
You know what I mean? Like there's always some type of like I was when I was in kindergarten, I went to Catholic school. So like I was just always at a church. You know what I mean? But I didn't know what the hell they were talking about. I was just there because I was there. You know what I mean? To go to school. And then as I continued growing and excuse me, I had a whole bunch of other like bouts with different versions of Christianity and whatever. But like as I just continued growing older, I like whatever. That's another story, I guess. Doesn't really matter. But it just what my point really was that we're just told these things, just like politics. Like we grow up listening to our parents talk. Like so if we grow up listening to our dad or whatever be some racist freaking Republican, whatever, however stereotype, whatever you want to call them, like in my experience, that's mostly what it's been. Is like I don't talk to my dad, we'll put it that way, right? Like so but I was at least when I was a kid stubborn enough to be like, wait a second, I don't think I like what he just said. And I had a different perspective coming out of my mom. They were divorced, you know what I mean? So like I literally had like two very different perspectives, and luckily I was able to have that. But as you grow, you just grow up listening to your surroundings. We're all products of our environment, right? And
Yeah.
now it's a matter of with the climate, the political climate that we're at, it's a matter of people just being too freaking stubborn, I think, to actually look a little bit deeper in themselves and what white privilege is and what other people are going through and all that kind of stuff. But it also opens up into what Nick was talking about like spirituality and like we're just kind of put into Christianity being born in America. I feel like, right? Like
Right.
like we don't have a lot of other options. Like it's not very common for you to hear what Nick just said that his story was. You know what I mean? Like it's some version of Catholicism or Christianity or whatever. And I think that it's just a matter of like realizing that there are so many other different I don't know, spiritualities. I don't know what the correct term would be to, you know what I mean? There's so many other different ways of whether it be freaking, you know, yoga and self-reflection or self-care or whatever, you know what I mean? One of the things that my mom did tell me when I was on my self-crisis journey, I'll shut up after this, is take what you can and leave the rest. And I have held that for 30, well, I'm not 33 years, but I've held on to that for a very, very long time. Because that's really what it was. Like I would go to churches that like girls were only allowed to wear skirts or have the pearls, and they would pray the gay out of people and all that kind of shit. You know what I mean? So, but then I would go home and be like, but mom, why the fuck do I have to wear a skirt? Like I'm at home, like I'm lounging, you know what I mean? And she'd be like, well, I don't think that you have to do that. It's okay. So like I would change my clothes, you know what I mean? But take what you want, take what you can and leave the rest. And that's just that I use that in my pretty much everyday life at this point.
Were you going to say something, Veronica?
Yeah. So kind of along the same lines of where, you know, Kwame talks about how hard it was when he disclosed being an atheist to his mother, and how it really hurt her deeply. And you know, where he says that he had, went back and forth between anger and pity for her. That he wasn't really angry that she was responsible for this false indoctrination coming up, because that was all that she knew, right? But again, him taking personal responsibility to, look into things and like you all said, to do his own research, and come to his own conclusions about things, and particularly, him coming back to a more scientific view of things. But it just kind of points out how, education should allow us to look at different solutions to one problem. Indoctrination does the exact opposite.
Right.
It says that there's only one solution to a problem.
Mm.
So it's real important that we look at that. And then, when he says, I stopped being so forceful and started to be more tolerant, where it speaks to meeting people where they're at. And,
Right.
how you all have mentioned, I too think of Malcolm X, when he would go to different peoples and speak, and he wasn't, he would find his commonalities, from their views, and kind of go from there. He never compromised what his own views were, but found what the
Right.
commonalities were. And then I also think of during that same time frame, during the Chicano movement, and watching, different videos of different leaders at that time. I think of Corky Gonzalez, who is from Colorado, from Denver, where I'm from. And, it was the same thing. Again, most people were Christian, and particularly Catholic. And so, his message had to be tailored a certain way, but it didn't compromise the integrity of the message itself, and then also going to the part where that whole paragraph where Kwame talks about, him being back in the SHU. I mean, the title of this chapter is Back to the SHU, Back to My Studies, because being in that sort of isolation just kind of lends itself to being able to do that. Being that he's isolated from other people's and things like that. But I could absolutely relate to that whole paragraph, and I kind of chuckled reading it because, I've always considered myself a nerd. And I've always kind of went a little overboard when it comes to study, if there's such a thing of going overboard. But, how he talks about how he would write stuff on the margins and underline things, circle things. And I even do the same thing where it says he was creating his own indexes, where it was that he could locate a particular passage again, until he became, familiar with it, to where he can just, bring it up from memory. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. I don't think that we do that enough, and I've heard people say things like, people just want to be stuck in the books, and I feel like, as if it has to be either the books or out actively doing something, like it has to be one or the other, when they should be happening simultaneously.
Yes, absolutely.
We should always be furthering our knowledge, so that we can do better. There was that part where he talked about, let's see here. He said, I realize now that every book one reads more than once, the person normally walks away with a deeper interpretation of it, partly because you read other books and have life experiences that enriches your understanding and comprehension the second or third time around, but also because our level of consciousness increases the more we study, and what was formerly abstract and obscure becomes more and more concrete in how we associate what the author is really trying to convey to us. And then he even mentioned like how he thought this only happened with the Bible. And I could relate to that as well, being that I have read the Bible several times myself growing up Christian. And that, you do think that way. It's almost like ingrained in you, that the Bible is this jewel, which I'm not saying that it's not. I still read the Bible and think there's lots to get out of there. But we can do that with anything that we read, you know, and how he said he'd write these little comments on there, and it was almost kind of like a glimpse into where he was at a specific point in time, and how he might go back to read it later and find that his view based on what he had written in the margin had kind of changed and developed. So I
Right.
thought that was pretty neat.
Yeah,
Oh.
I just see Brother Kwame, when he has a concerns or a question about something, he will investigate it, which is really good, to see if his belief matches up to his research, or if he needs to look for a resolve. And this is what I truly admire about his character, is that he really searched for answer. And it goes down to the title of his book, My Search for Answer, because he seeks truth and meaning. And this is one chapter I didn't even expect for him to even raise any concerns or questions about religion. But then again, it does tie into everything, and it would have been remiss if he wouldn't address, you know, his own belief, you know, and it's not to really I would say throw his readers off, or, you know, tell his readers to accept what his belief is, but just to present where he's at as an individual and where he stands in the belief of that. And at first, it goes back to my belief, where I was raised in thinking that to be an atheist is like a sinful term where you shouldn't speak about it, and you would think of that person being evil, being unrealistic, until I happened to look at one of those judge shows. I think it was Judge Judy, where it was a problem with I believe the father attending his daughter wedding because it was at a synagogue. And to make a long story short, he said he don't believe in anything that he couldn't see. And if there were a God, then why do we have the problems that we face in this earth? Why are there hungry children in Ethiopia starving? And why are other people able to have a meal on their plate? Why is so much anger and hate in the world if there is a God? It brings a whole lot of question. I was like, wow, I didn't really think about that as, you know, coming from an atheist. Now I can understand why he's an atheist. And, you know, if the whole family was upset with the father because he would not put his feelings and belief aside just for a happy moment to walk his daughter down an aisle. And I say, do you compromise your own religion just to satisfy somebody else? Or what that shows that you're not true to who you are. You're not, you know, saying this is where I firmly stand, because of the fact that, yeah, just for a moment of happiness, I'm gonna take what is so valuable and so precious in my life and just put it to the side. So that opened my eyes about an atheist. Sister, you have your hand up?
Yeah, oh, yeah. I know
Because
what
I
you're
can only
thinking
see
of.
you. So if there's
That's
anybody
okay.
else,
I know. Well, if it's okay, I'll go ahead. Yeah, I wanted to speak about the business of study that Veronica had raised, because, and also how it does connect with what the religion and things we're talking about. That, you know, I mean, I went to community college for a couple years off and on taking classes, but that's not how I got educated. I really identify with Kwame because I got educated like him. I mean, I wanted to know stuff. I had questions and I went exploring. And so I would read, books like y'all have done, and, kind of listen to people that I admired to see what they thought, and other people that I knew who were intellectuals from the working class. I mean, my, greatest mentor and person I most admired, he was a bricklayer.
Mm.
He was this African-American, he's gone now, he got into his 90s too. But because he'd been through the Second World War and everything, I mean, he had all these experiences, but he decided at one point in his life, he said he ended up under a bridge and he was broke. It was when people were hoboing across the country. And he started to cry, and then he just shook it off. And I'm not gonna cry, not gonna cry, God damn it. I'm gonna do something about this. And he started studying and started struggling, and like we're doing. That's what we're doing. We're studying, we're struggling to figure out the way to go, how to talk to people, how to go. So that's so important. That's why book groups, things like this, we got to keep it up, right?
Absolutely.
And the other thing I wanted to say about, the spiritual thing and everything, like, I think that what I've come to understand is that there's an explanation for natural forces that doesn't mean we don't have to use God to explain it. Now, that doesn't mean a person can't believe in a God. It just means that when we come to making decisions, what shall we do? What's our politics? We don't really need a God to make that decision. Like God says, don't pay any attention to those people. Right? No, we don't need to do it that way. We can actually look at the real world as best we can, judge for ourselves what is correct. And so the world doesn't need to have this. It doesn't mean that you can't believe it, right? You can do whatever you like for your spiritual outlook. As far as the spiritual thing, to me, I'm finding that the older I get, I'm finding a spiritual lift in things I never expected. Like the other day, I was reflecting back on my experience in this organization where everything went wrong as far as I'm concerned. And when you look back at the Panthers, right, we know if you start studying there, you'll see so much went wrong and so many mistakes were made. And then, but I had this epiphany. I said, maybe there was a lot of shit. It was like manure, right? But there was a plant, there was a seed that actually managed to see the light of day. I mean, it takes shit, it takes manure for things to grow.
Everything is a process.
And
Everything is a process.
And so it was like spiritual to me. I thought, yes, we fucked up. People fuck up. They make mistakes with each other, but something good emerged. So there's something in there about us that's good. And there's something that we can build on, right?
Absolutely.
So, yeah, that was it.
And
Can I
Veronica,
just take a moment to read what's in the chat? Because y'all had some real good questions, like Elisa say, also second, Nick, Jesus was definitely a socialist. You used revolutionary. Sister Veronica said absolutely a socialist. And Elisa say reacted to absolutely a socialist with a heart. And Brother Nick, you say yes, and use his practice to inspire other people to challenge the empire to the extent they cooped his message and adopted it. And you said in parentheses, and alternated his message the parentheses, similar to the way the U.S. empire had pretended to agree with MLK. And Sister Veronica, you say, whenever we ready for a shift, I want to bring up another topic in the chapter. And Elisa said, yes, Nick. I used to say he was the first brown man executed by the state, at least in a story. Everyone knows about it. And Brother Nick reacted to to Elisa's comment. And let's see, Elisa reacted to yes, and then removed the heart reaction from yes. Nick, I used to, and that's the end of that. Yeah.
I did say one other thing in the chat, which was, Leslie, I assume you're talking about Nelson Peary being the
I
Brit. And
absolutely was,
I
yes.
think personally, I think he's one of the most important people in American history.
I do too, yeah.
Especially as theories related and like looking past Marxism to think about where we're at now.
Right.
And people don't know about him because he's that important and he's hidden. I definitely have a whole list of, or a whole stack of CDs that I'm putting on, digitizing to put on the internet, that I can share with y'all. And this book, The Future's Up to Us, An American Revolutionary Talking Politics with the
Yep.
American People, is a book that I read over and over and over, and it's something I recommend to everyone. It's
Favorite
on.
book.
Make sure you put that in the
Yes.
chat or the link. Yeah, especially our group.
I will. It's honestly, I know Shamako's read it probably many.
I have to, yeah. It's
And
great book.
it's just really one of the most important books that I have ever read, and so I just want to put that. And then I know Veronica's had some
Yeah,
other
I
comments.
see her hands too, sister.
Yes, yes. I didn't want to move us in another direction until we were ready to do that. So I did want to bring us back to the beginning of the chapter where Brother Kwame talks about privately run prisons.
Yes.
And, just kind of share some things that came up for me here. So I have not heard of the GEO group. I've heard of others like some Corporation of America, CCA, I think it is. But this one, GEO group, I had not heard of. So I went online to check out their website. And I was on the phone with the brother. I won't say who he is, so to not compromise him in his situation. I know a lot of people that are behind the walls, and we had read this chapter together. And so then when I started looking up GEO group, and the first thing that popped up, I said, okay, it's exactly the way Brother Kwame has it here, GEO Group Inc. I said, so this must be it. So I just started reading up on it. And as I start reading it, the brother says, yeah, that's not it. That can't be it. It has to be another one. You're looking at the wrong one. That can't be the group. And the reason that he said that was because it was so beautiful what it was talking about right from the beginning, where it said something to the effect of, it just sounded very positive, almost sounded like what a lot of nonprofits sound like, when it's talking about, addressing certain social conditions and stuff. It just sounded really good. So I would invite all of y'all to just go on there and look up the GEO Group Inc.
Definitely.
And they have 3 subsections right from the beginning. The 2021 Human Rights Report, which I thought was interesting because we're in 2023. So the last human rights, quote unquote, human rights report that is on there is the 2021 report, which begs the answer of what happened in 2022 and 2023. And not just that, but when, there's right. And there is a big section regarding COVID in there. So yeah, you're absolutely right, sister. But I thought it interesting that those 3 things that you can actually click on have to do with human rights. 2021 Human Rights Report, the human rights due diligence, and then the 3rd tab is prior years human rights and ESG reports. So to me, it's interesting on several levels. If you have the mindfulness to speak of human rights, and that's not what's actually happening in these facilities and institutions, then you absolutely know what you're doing.
Absolutely.
number
And I
one,
and I think
right?
they just trying to soothe some
Mhm.
people thoughts and feelings because of the fact the closest connection to these prisons are the family members and the family members who will raise a issue. And it go based on what I had researched when I had looked and see that these private prisons are making a lot of money,
Lots
totaling
of
over
money.
$14 trillion. And it costs more to house an inmate
Yeah,
more than sending an individual to school.
right.
And I think
Mhm.
I have mentioned,
Yeah.
the GEO as being one of the private companies. And I feel that there should not be any private companies, family members owning these prisons. And again, that brings up, what is still part of the Constitution with the 13, 14, 15 Amendment,
Absolutely.
Mhm.
you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I thank you for bringing that up. And it's evidence, even, to think about a lot of people being held down or locked down due to COVID and the human issue thing, when you see that it's a matter of control to break down the spirit of somebody and you expect for that person to reform. And how can they reform when they are faced with these harsh conditions, which is knowingly and unknowingly being done and seen in these type of institution where even they are being denied of their maintenance medication to sustain them. And they are, there are people who's losing their lives
Mhm.
behind of neglect,
Mhm.
medical neglect, denied of their medicine, even if they have it on their personal, not personal, but have it with their personal belongings.
Right.
And to hear even about one detainee um giving birth in a cell and holding her own baby,
Oh,
for hours because nobody came. And
yeah.
I can
Mhm.
just
Mhm.
imagine other issues that could have gone left. And even when those people who have an addiction and attention's not being given to them to
Yeah,
get them the help they need, and they end up dying in a cell, or
right.
the mysterious thing of people getting hung, and I'm saying this is
Yeah,
all through your watch.
right.
Okay,
Right.
this is all,
Right.
Yeah.
Um,
yes.
that this issue of privatization, I think, really important because
Yeah.
it does explain what's happening to us in this country. I mean, the prison system is a great example, like y'all have been explaining about how horrible and horrendous the effects of it is. But this is corporations running everything. They get
Mhm.
they get to run everything. They run healthcare now. Everything's
Oh
private.
yes.
They take over the schools. I mean, we've struggled here in Chicago like crazy trying to keep our public schools from becoming privatized. And people are, talked into supporting the privatization, like the Disney taking over a school and this corporation taking over a school. And they
Mhm.
have bled our public schools dry of funds so that nobody wants to go to them. They're inferior to this Disney school over here. But what's actually happening to us is that all of the things that were considered the commons, the things that we own, that we publicly control, are taken away from us into the hands of corporations who just are there to make more profit.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the other thing is like, there's a definition about fascism that we should look at. Corporate control. When the corporations are running the country, there's no democracy. And that's what we're approaching by the fact that our commons is going away. Like, you've probably heard about people demanding like that we nationalize things. And I think that's why it has to be supported. You know, nationalizing utilities, taking it away from private,
Mhm.
nationalizing healthcare, single payer healthcare. Let's do the things where this is part of the socialist communist revolution, that we get to take it over and run it, take it away from the corporations.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'll get off my soapbox now, but this is such an important issue that I think I'm glad it was raised in here, because people don't know it's broader than
Absolutely.
everyone thinks. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
just, you know, to what you're saying about like the merger of the corporation and the state, which is like
Yeah.
the definition of fascism, right?
Right.
And to education. I mean, I always go back to this book and the theories in here, but one thing that Nelson talks about is that education was once viewed by the ruling class as a cost of production,
Yeah.
Mhm.
just like housing and healthcare
Yeah.
were once viewed as a cost of production. And now we're living in a world where the ruling class no longer needs us, right? They have new tools of production, laborless production through automation, right? Through which is something that's never ever existed. They've always needed us to produce for them. But the microprocessor chip was created in the 70s, right? And
Yeah.
robotic arm and the microprocessor chip allow for this laborless production to where we are all dispossessed from the economy. And so what do we do about that, right? What do we do about not being needed, like the way we don't
I'm
need
glad you
coaches?
raised it.
And
I'm glad you raised that.
just to finish my thought is just that you know, we aren't needed anymore, and so there's this like growing equality of misery amongst all of us, our whole entire class. People who are formerly middle class, upper middle class, are now driving Uber to survive and different things, or homeless. I mean, there's people that reach out to the Poor People's Army all the time, like, I'm, you know, I have a master's degree and I'm living in the Walmart parking lot in my car, right? And
Yeah.
I think that you know, we need to get our bread still, and a job is no longer the way we can do that for the masses of it. And this is going to be growing, and it's been growing rapidly.
Yeah.
I know you know, elders have seen it. You know, I'm only 32, but y'all have seen a lot of this happen. And you know, in order to get our bread without work, we have to do different things. And so then I go back to the fascism pieces. Why is fascism here? Why is it growing? It's not just corporate control, but it's to protect private property,
Right.
because people will get what they need. I think we can look back to the 92 LA riots and 2020 as well, but specifically the 92 riots, or uprising, however you want to characterize it, as a moment where people weren't just uprising against police brutality and structural racism. People were going to the streets to get what they need. I mean, there were mothers who weren't going and getting TVs and radios. They were getting bread and food and diapers.
Diapers. Yeah.
And then fast forward to 2020, when we have another, you know, the largest uprising since I don't know when, since Vietnam, I guess. And you know, we in this context, you know, more people now have died from the opioid crisis than in Vietnam. But they've figured out through nonprofits and how to control that energy so people aren't actually making effective change to the whole system. And they're growing a police state and a military state to control us. They figured out how to control us through these means because they know what's happening too. They know that we're not needed anymore, and they've just pretty effectively figured out how to control all of us and co-opt leaders into the nonprofit industrial complex. I mean, the someone made a comment about human rights. The Poor People's Army, our full name is the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign. We at once had 130 different organizations or affiliates across the country that were under this umbrella of economic human rights, and really brought the framework of looking at human rights as an organizing tool and as a concrete thing based on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights from the United Nations, as a way to like unify the fight back movement to a fight forward movement for human rights, knowing that this fascist state's growing, that they don't need us anymore for our labor. We're not exploitable, so we're expendable. And they've effectively figured out how to co-opt that language. And there's countless interns of ours and different people that used to work with us that took that language, took the credibility they got with us to go start their own nonprofits, get literal $1 million grants, to start organizations that have, centered on human rights. The International Network for Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights was founded on our backs. The National Economic Social Rights Initiative, the Human Rights Center down in Atlanta, and then even founding organization that literally sound just like it, like the Poor People's Campaign. That was founded by our former intern, who her husband is one of the people who got the $1 million grant. And then together they founded, the Kairos Center, the People's Forum in New York, and then, most recently the Poor People's Campaign as a way to, and then went and literally flew across the country and sprinkled $30,000-$40,000 at a time to the different organizations that were part of the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign and said, hey, you're broke, come work with us, the Poor People's Campaign, and we'll give you money. We'll give you $30,000-$40,000 so you don't lose your building, right?
Wow.
Or too, right? They're not upper middle class people, and so they've really been very, very effective at not co-opting just us. I mean, I'm just using us as an example because my elders have taught me about this stuff deeply, and Shimako lived through this stuff. Shimako was part of this co-opting. He was, ran Hip Hop Congress, which was National Network of Hip Hop Artists working for human rights and trying to build, more political action through hip hop, and was part of the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign. But yeah, it's just at a moment where we gotta like really, study this stuff, and really get deep and figure out what they've done and what their strategy is, so we can build a strategy.
There's something I just watched that I'm going to share. It was about the left in this country and how the government has made sure that there's a compatible left. That's how they call it. Compatible with them and their imperialist aims, their wars, stuff like that. So they have organized a left and they fund it very well. That actually doesn't oppose, it looks like it opposes them. And I'll see if I can share it on the Signal. It was on YouTube. It was just an excellent presentation. But I wanted to say, I think, did Veronica had some points or something? I think she didn't get a chance to raise.
Yes, I can jump in. It's actually a good segue, actually. So I want to also touch on the term neocolonialism, which Brother Kwame speaks of there in the chapter, and wanted to give the definition of given by the BLA the Black Liberation Army. Neocolonialism is domination of a country or people by an imperialist power where the economic, political, and military structure is manned and run by the native bourgeoisie. The imperialists maintain control of the economy because they continue to own the means of production. And the client state is totally dependent upon them for their survival.
Right.
And so I just wanted to touch on that aspect of it. And then also just going back to the GEO group, where it actually has a whole letter. It's a letter that covers the whole first page of one of the 3 different tabs, where the first thing that you see is a picture of a Black man. And the quality of the picture is so poor that you can't even really distinguish his facial features, but you see this dark Black man right on the upper left-hand corner, and it says, "Letter from our executive chairman of the board." And so, it just also just makes you think of, how again, whether people are being tokenized, they're voluntarily, okay with being in these positions, or, whether they're complicit in it or aware of all of it, is, to me, was one of the things that kind of stood out, that, it just seems kind of strategic. We see that a lot. There will be a Black or brown face right from the beginning. We see it in the media as well. Yeah, it's like, okay, a Black or brown brother or sister was beaten or killed, by the state, and they will throw a Black or brown person to come and speak on the issue and give a statement, just kind of trying to pacify things. The other thing too is, when you look at the board of directors, you don't see any representation for the community itself. So you want to throw out all these statistics, which we all know statistics can be manipulated. So you look at the website and it just sounds beautiful. But for those of us who have people incarcerated, we know that this is not the case. They are not getting quality health care. They're not getting quality food. They are not getting adequate rec time, adequate time out in the sun for, even just something as simple as that. So it comes down to me for where is the input of the people that are there, the people that are actually there. Do they have a voice in the matter? I don't see no statements. I see pictures. I see pictures of what appears to be somebody getting some sort of medical care. I see pictures of a rec yard that looks okay. And, we all know that these things are just not there anymore. And if they are, the quality of it isn't there. And then there's no input from the families. It's not just the people that are incarcerated, it's also the families of people. And they could tell you, this is not the case. Like, you're painting a picture of something that is not accurate in any way, shape, or form. So you want to talk about accountability and all these, use all these beautiful words and stuff. There's a place here where it says, potentially salient human right topics. Please refer to Appendix A for a description of each human right. And I'll read you guys some of these. Right of persons with disabilities, physical and or mental. Right to suitable clothing. Right to exercise. Right to have contact with the outside world. Right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. Right to suitable food. Right to privacy. Right to equality and freedom from discrimination. Those are some of the things. Right to own property. Right to personal records. Things like this. We could probably have an hour-long talk on each one of these different points on how it is that people that are behind them walls get absolutely none of that. Brother Kwame talked about his transition. He's talked about several transitions from one unit to another. And many times their stuff gets lost in that transition from one place to another. Those things don't get replaced, and if you even look on, what they're able to, he talked on where tobacco had become illegal overnight. because it used to be that they could get this on commissary, but even then, it creates a black market
Yeah,
for it because it still gets in somehow. But now you've criminalized tobacco use, and so something that is an option out here in the free world. I mean, it's just more and more of these different things that are taken away from people, and the
Right.
dehumanizing of them is just
right.
to a whole nother level.
One of the things I was thinking about too, like I've been fearing for a long time, is that this privatization of prisons and stuff is kind of a model for how to
Mm.
deal with us. Like Nick, some of your points, which were really good, around the technology and how it's forcing people into the margins of society. And that's why we have thousands of people on the street, like in places like LA, where they just, in Chicago, it's growing all the time. I don't know how it is for you guys, but here, the winters are brutal here, and we've got people in tents, and talk about how they come in and take their tents even and throw them in the trash, or if they leave, they take all their stuff. It's awful. So anyway, I don't know, I got lost in this point here, but where was I? Sorry about that, guys.
It's okay. We get so excited, right?
I mean, yeah, I get off on this thing. Oh yeah, that I worry, like, when are they going to come up with, well, we're going to solve homelessness by building these camps. And now you're all going to go into these camps. And those camps, what are they going to be but concentration camps? Like we say in our preface, that, like that was what was done to the American Indians. Well, that's a way of dealing with people. It's like historic. You put them in, contain them, get them in places where you can contain them.
Right.
And we've all talked about that, the high percentage of young Black and brown men who, what are they going to do if they don't get out in society, get a good job? Like they want the American dream too. So, they turn to criminality, and then they're warehoused in these privatized, disgusting holes. So, this is the thing that maybe a lot of Americans don't realize. I think, like you were saying, Nick, they're next, or it's happening to them. When I look at the homeless population, it is not all minorities. Believe you me. I mean, there's plenty of, especially old people. I mean, I think if I was out on the street right now, I'd die. And I don't know how they survive, but there's all these old white couples, they're not even couples sometimes, just individual woman, the white woman on the bus the other day, she was just obviously homeless, obviously just getting destroyed by the street. And I just shoved her a few dollars, and she just took it. She was so happy to get it. It's happening everywhere is what I'm trying to say, and to all peoples.
Yeah, and I wanted to have one direct response and then go to Sister Anna, which is
Sorry, Anna.
just that this is why the Poor People's Army takes over abandoned houses to house homeless families.
Yeah.
That's like one of our main projects of survival over the past 30 years, because there's more empty houses than homeless people across the country. In Philly, there's 10 empty houses for every homeless person. In Chicago, there's 27
Yeah, there are empty things everywhere.
Detroit, it's 53-1. But and so, like, if housing's doesn't become a human right, a lot of people are just going to be homeless real soon. And that's why, like, I think the Poor People's Army is so important, which is just people who have been poor for a long time and have experienced that homelessness. The organized poor have a lot to teach newly poor people. There are those survival skills that can't be taught just through a webinar or I mean, to an extent they can, but like we're building cadre from the ranks of the poor, from the bottom,
Yes.
and teaching how to take over abandoned houses and teaching deep theory as a and these survival skills, because like things are getting so much worse, and they're just going to continue to get worse as technology
Advances, yeah.
advances. And anyway, I'm going to ramble forever, but Sister Anna, you had a hand.
Oh, yes. We have 4 o'clock, and I
Oh,
just want to say, Brother Nick, I appreciate all of what you have bringing up as far as these fabulous points. Because, like you say, we have to look at the situation now, dealing with technology, and the fact is where we are no longer needed. And it's like what Malcolm X say, only thing you have to do to know the future is to examine the past. And for
Yeah.
example, if America was built on the back of the blood, sweat, and tears of slaves, and you have technology taking place, it comes down to the Brother Nick question or concern a statement where with technology, we are no longer needed. And
Yeah.
if that comes to that point, then what is the next step when you have an overpopulation of people? You're going to get rid of them.
That's
You're
right.
going to definitely get rid of them. And
Right.
I just want to, also add the point in the appendix 3 where it addressed the 10 point of the 10 point. We want land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, peace, and people's community control of modern technology. And it further say, I'm not going to try to get all into it, but it say, when in the course of human events, it become necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitles them, a decent respect of the opinion of mankind requires that they should declare the cause which impelled them to the separation. And I see that, right now, when we look at the situation that's taking place in society with the private prisons, with no use for human interaction and connection,
Right.
communication, where you have a lot of people that's not only homeless, but you got those who decide to be houseless because of the fact they can't afford
Right.
what is an apartment, what is a condo, what is a house. Nothing is yours when you have to pay taxes on it.
I don't think
Nothing
it's a
is yours.
decision, though.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go ahead. I didn't hear that. Can you
No, just
repeat it?
saying I don't think it's ever a decision to be houseless.
Right,
Well,
right.
well,
That's a choice. Well, yeah, in a way, you have to look at the circumstances and the situations that you are faced.
right.
Either you get evicted because of the fact it take one situation like a job you lost, or illness, or a catastrophic event like having a stroke, or being blind, or can't hear, or something that interrupt your daily means of living, to say, oh my God, now I can't sustain myself, where you got to make a decision. Do you live in this apartment where you at?
Yeah.
Do you live in this fabulous home where you need to downsize to the point of why would I downsize when I can't afford nothing?
Yeah.
So you then again have that choice. Well, look, I could live in a school bus. I could live in a van. It's
Right.
just me. It's just me, my dog. It's just me, my dog, and my husband. It's just me, my dog, my husband, and a newborn baby. We could tour the world, enjoy life, and save money, instead of living in something that's $2,000, $3,000, or a little closet box that's $5,000 in New York City. So I appreciate everything that y'all bringing up from
Yeah.
Sister Veronica, of course, Sister, Leslie and brother and Elisa, as well as what you have mentioned, Brother Nico.
Well, I think this has been a great discussion. It might be one of our best. There's been a lot of good points, I
I was
think
gonna
Yeah.
we
you
all
might-
been schooled.
say, Leslie.
What?
I think every week you might think that we top ourselves because I feel like
Well, one hopes we do, right? We get a little better each
Mhm.
week. Well, I think we're all starting to deal with some core issues, I mean, like his book, it was about the development of things. And now we're sort of getting to some real substantial issues where his mind is engaged. What kind of a person will he be when he goes out, right? And wants to be able to be a leader and a thinker and know what he's talking about. So anyway, I appreciate it. If it wasn't for these meetings, I don't think my mind would stay stimulated.
All right, same here. And I appreciate, that we doing this read, because at first I was like, okay, we're gonna read each chapter. And I'm like, okay, will we hold and grasp the audience and the people who's moderating? But it's so valid and important because not only you'll share your life experience, but also you can expand your own information, your own knowledge to even read other books or refer other books, and just be stimulated just to get back to the basic of turning a page instead of looking at a screen. And I
Mhm.
appreciate what we have because it's part of the blueprint. And that's one thing that very seasoned warriors would know, which I mentioned, you would know the difference between a revolutionary and an evolutionary. And a revolutionary is the one who stick to core principles, and you have those evolutionary who needs to, read the manual or just get themselves into a good book and just raise an interesting point where everything is not being dressed in a certain uniform and toting a gun for what when you don't even know why the reason you're doing it.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And I actually have to run, and I know I'm got the host privileges, so
Okay.
I guess we'll cut it off there. But it's been great.
Yeah.
I'll see y'all next week.
Thank
Okay.
you all.
All
Bye.
power.
Bye-bye.
All power to the people.
All power.
Power.